Welcome and thank you for joining. This interview is part of a research article titled Ethical Risk of Generative AI in Education by Or Daniel and the advisor Dr. Rinat Rosenberg-Kima from the Technion Israel Institute of Technology. The availability of the interview along with the scientific article can benefit both the scientific and education communities. The interview content was not edited, only noise and pauses were removed. We thank all subject matter experts for contributing their knowledge and experience to this study. A link to the article and ways to contact us will be added to the information of this interview. Interview number 15 with Dr. Daniel Schiff, held on the 26th of June 2024 in English. Enjoy. So what is your professional background and experience? And please mention your name.
Sure. So I'm Daniel Schiff. I'm an assistant professor of technology policy at Purdue University. So this is Indiana in the United States, just a couple hours south of Chicago. I co-direct the Governance and Responsible AI Lab here. So my work is on AI policy and ethics background. So I studied philosophy at Princeton University. I actually did an undergraduate thesis called The Ethics of Artificial Intelligence. This is back in the 2000s, so before AI ethics was a field, really. So very early in that space. Did some robotics and intelligent systems. Wanted to go into AI policy, but there was no such field as AI policy back then. So I went into social policy more generally. I got a master's at the University of Pennsylvania and worked in the K-12 nonprofit education sector for about 5 years. So doing dropout prevention, college access, STEM education, school funding policy, things like that, mostly around the school district of Philadelphia, a little bit for Pennsylvania. And then about that point, some of the AI issues were coming more into the forefront again, especially labor disruption in the mid-2010s. And I thought, oh no, this is a good time to go back and get the PhD. So I went down to Georgia Tech. My hometown is Atlanta, Georgia. And did my PhD focused on AI policy and ethics. So since then, I've done a lot on international governance, down to subnational industry governance and standards, AI in a bunch of different sectors. So criminal justice, education, future of work, misinformation, bunch of different quantitative, qualitative, philosophical methods. And that's how I got where I am today.
So in your view, what are the potential benefits or advantages of using generative AI technologies in education?
So advantages and benefits of Gen AI. So we have this long history of trying to computerize teaching and learning with sort of traditional goals of, we can personalize it for everyone, which has always been an educational ambition. We can do scale and efficiency, so we can reach everyone around the world and very low marginal cost. Okay, so this is a goal of digital education, online education. Gen AI is advancing this quite a bit because it's really good at generating fluent text, especially now, quite fluent images and videos, and rapidly. So I think, just across all of the types of learning tools we would imagine, creating course content, creating assessments, creating kind of interactive materials or multimedia, kind of full intelligent tutoring systems. All of this stuff is advanced by generative AI because of its ability largely to generate higher quality, more convincing content, to synthesize knowledge much more quickly using natural language compared to just sort of grabbing an old school Google search and trying to put that content into some educational platform.
Well, thank you for that answer. So let's go to the other side of this equation. So what do you see as the main risk, challenges, or ethical concerns associated with educational uses of generative AI?
Yeah, it's good to consider the flip side here. And since a lot of my work is on ethics, I do think about this side probably even more than the benefits. I think about, important to minimize the risks so that we can, realize the benefits. So there's a long list here. Some of this I've written about in some of my academic papers on AI education, some of the early papers in this field. So some well-known issues in AI ethics, bias that could be against, targeting or minimizing learning against any gender, race, ethnic learning style, favoring certain, regions or types of learners over others. We have issues that, stem from that to inequality and global development. So you can imagine using ed tech tools when they're not appropriate, or using them instead of developing a teaching workforce. So kind of a premature automation of a country, of its educational ecosystem. You certainly have plenty of privacy and data concerns that one could go into. You have issues with transparency and explainability. So if an AI system is, grading a student or saying, oh, a student is at risk of failing, do we know why those predictions were made? Are they reliable? We have challenges with things like empathetic emulation and things like nudging or manipulation. So do we want AI systems or virtual agents, avatars of your face, whatever it is, to shame students or to call them out? But back in privacy, we have lots of things like tracking, eye tracking, attention tracking. So lots of different challenges there. And to that, I'll just add, implementation is really hard. It's possible to do this poorly. And then probably one major issue, which I didn't anticipate a few years ago, but is really prominent now, is just the misconduct. So I think the risk here is students use AI, or teachers use AI in ways that serves as sort of a crutch and undermines their mastery of content. And then they sort of fail to develop the important skills that they may actually need in the future. So it could, advance people's educational abilities, but it could also, help people fake them and make it difficult to distinguish between students who are doing well in learning and students who are not doing well or who are engaged in misconduct.
Amazing. But I just need to ask a direct question, like to what you said. So a lot of this risk, right? We can find them in AI in general, but we can find, a lot of talked about it in AI in education also. But the new technology is that now it's everywhere, right? Generative AI programs, you can find them almost in every school now, maybe. I think, at least here in Israel, people are already using it. Is there any unique risk that is associated with generative AI that we couldn't see in AI?
Yeah. Okay. So unique risks of generative AI. So the staple things that are associated as novel risks would be hallucinations. Some people don't like that term, but effectively, because natural language generation now is so convincing, it's so fluent, text that large language models produce is really compelling. It sounds credible. So the models can make mistakes. They can say false things that people may believe. So that's one. They can also sort of distort information or create false impressions or present an issue as biased or having both sides when it shouldn't. So there's just all sorts of ways to convey information in ways that might be problematic or misleading, or might even sort of lead students to think in a certain way or to write in a certain way, sort of emulating the style of AI. So some of those, what does it mean to uncritically adopt the practices of using generative AI or to use knowledge from chatbots? Any of those things could be are amongst the unique risks. But I do think things like misconduct are also enhanced once you increase the the usability and penetration of the tools, as you said, really widespread. That changes the character of educational systems.
Oh, thank you for that. So let's go to the next one. So, what recommendation would you have for policymakers regarding regulating or providing guidance on generative AI in education?
Another great question and a really big question. Tough because different states have very different structures for regulation. Some are very centralized and they can make national policies. Many countries don't have that. They have down to the school and school district and teacher have lots of autonomy and flexibility. So things to think about here. So part of this is regulation of the AI ecosystem broadly. So all the ethical issues we talked about, all those guardrails, are those being encouraged, enforced, monitored, incentivized, so that companies that are making, say, the foundational or frontier AI tools, that these are high quality, reliable, trustworthy, with bias mitigation, all of this. So this is a big step, is regulating the AI industry. Moving to education, I would say we would want something like well-designed procurement guidelines, whether that's from federal or local governments. So are there rules in a school district that say, hey, before your teachers or your principal buy some tool, it needs to go through these checks. It needs to be approved according to such and such privacy standards or bias standards. So some kind of procurement framework that covers different practical and ethical and legal issues. I think it'll be the kinds of regulations we would put on AI. Many will apply to AI ed. So you'll want compliance with privacy laws. We have many countries that don't even have privacy legislation, so that would need to be put in place. Some of this gets a little bit more into practice rather than regulation, but maybe it fits into the category of guardrails. I think it's incumbent on educational institutions, decision makers, to very sort of carefully and strategically roll out AI tools. So I'm thinking about, say, take a risk of students use it, they're misusing it. Maybe the teachers are they're auto grading everyone's essays. The essays are all automatically created too. We might want to be a little bit careful in what tools we roll out, how we test them, have we done pilots and evaluations? Do we build in high quality implementation and training for teachers before we roll these things out? So I would sort of generally encourage educational agencies and institutions to have also frameworks for piloting and testing and supporting rollout, in addition to regulations on the developers and for procurement.
So that's great suggestions. I think you also started to answered the next one, but I will ask it anyway if you want to add anything else. So what suggestion would you have for educators or administrators looking to integrate generative AI into curriculum or educational institution, of course?
That's right. Yeah, so I spoke to that a little bit. So procurement is part of that. Training is part of that. Training to include, basic AI literacy, teachers, administrators, even students. We've done various workshops with, undergrads, our PhD students. Do they know how and when they should use these tools, or when they should not use it? And we're all sort of learning here. Teachers, administrators, certainly. So training, including responsible uses, strengths and weaknesses of the tools. Careful rollout and testing. This might mean, a school district or whatever the jurisdiction may be in a country. They try out a few tools, or they very carefully consider, here's a few good use cases. Let's try a dropout prevention tool. Let's try a math tutoring tool. Let's try a foreign language support tool. Think about those things, have very well-designed frameworks and evaluations for expanding and rolling them out. Other things that are important, I may not have mentioned, teacher education programs. So those will also need, adaptation. What else is important for institutions and schools to do? So I think, so this again goes into this idea of, let's say, uncritical adoption. So I'm just going to buy a tool. I'm just going to start using it. It's doing this cool stuff, but I don't really know the implications it has. Some of this, maybe a lot of this, has bearings on broader pedagogy. So, hey, maybe I will let my students make automatically generated essays, because maybe I think they don't need some of those skills anymore, but they still need other skills, and I'm not sure which ones. Well, what skills will they still need in 10 years? Do I at least have a stance? What do they need in math? What do they need to know in history? Is it okay to move from memorization to, fact checking or synthesizing as core skills? So as I'm adopting an AI tool or some modality here, I may need to rethink my broader pedagogy, my student engagement approach, my assessment approach, some of which might mean, lockdown in-class written exams. Some might mean open-ended AI-supported reports, but with some transparency. So I would say, more than, maybe anything since computers, this requires a potentially major reconsideration of most aspects of our pedagogy. And all of those things will need to be considered by educational institutions. And that's really hard, and it's going to take a long time, but we're sort of playing a lot of catch up here.
That was an amazing answer. I will tell you why later on after the interview. But thank you for that. So in your opinion, under what circumstances the use of generative AI in educational setting is appropriate and ethically acceptable? And when could it be inappropriate or unethical?
Okay. Okay, so I'm thinking here about sort of use cases. Let's sort of stipulate here that the developers are following well-designed, national regulations. They've done their algorithmic impact assessments or their well-being or human rights, impact assessments. So we think the tools themselves are pretty good. They've sort of managed many of the risks. They're sort of high-quality tools, not spitting out a bunch of misinformation. Okay. I think in terms, one unacceptable thing from an educational standpoint is to seriously undermine student learning for things we think are important. So there's I would say, an impetus in both the private and public sector to just make the products, to just produce the deliverables. Who cares if you know how to code as long as you can make the visualization? Okay. But as I think we're seeing more, and we'll see how this evidence unfolds, it's possible to really undercut student learning. So we have a concept here I've learned from some students. It's called the third-year wall in computer science, undergraduates in college. So students can get through the first couple of years of their college education by using large language models to answer many of their homework questions. Well, they often get to the final exam and they do really poorly because they haven't learned the material, but they sort of get through. Well, then they get to their third year, and as of now, the models aren't good enough to do some of that homework. So they start doing terribly, and their grades are really bad, and they drop out of college, and they get debt, all this kind of stuff. We don't want to use AI to shortcut tasks that we need students to learn how to do. So if we think, hey, students need to learn critical thinking, writing helps them develop thoughts and structure. Well, then we don't want to use AI to supplant their learning of their writing skills. So the sort of long way, just to summarize it, is think about which skills we think matter and make sure that we're still developing those skills, not just using AI to develop the final products of those skills. So those would be unacceptable uses. Acceptable would be ones that support students gaining those skills. So in my classrooms, I'll do a lot of basic information seeking. Hey, look up a concept you haven't heard. You want to know 5 minutes worth of content about biomolecular, tools? Read about that for 5 minutes. Great. So background information, clarification, some kind of creativity or artistic exploration. Rewrite the story from the perspective of someone in the 1800s. Rewrite this perspective that's a poem about a king. Write it from the perspective of a peasant, whatever it is. So creative exploration, basic learning and fact finding. Another one would be sort of feedback. So I don't want AI to write people's papers or write people's code, but I find that there's some great promise potentially in give feedback on my draft paper, give feedback on my outline. Tell me, are there mistakes in my code? How could I make my code cleaner and higher quality? So a common practice now in my classes, in my syllabus policies, for example, I'll say, you shouldn't use AI to generate your ideas for you. You shouldn't use AI to do your core brainstorming. What should my paper be about? Give me 5 ideas. Come up with your idea, face the blank page, right? That's a skill. It's, dealing with barriers and struggle and uncertainty. And then when you've drafted your outline, ask for some feedback. When you've written your paper, ask for some feedback. So So I'm starting personally to sort of find some unacceptable cases, some positive cases, some principles that are sort of guiding my thinking. But I'll say this is very much an evolving process. I'm in regular conversation with lots of different levels of teachers and learners and trying to come up with more kind of general principles to answer your question here.
That was amazing. So thank you for that answer and giving that examples. So I go to the next one. In your opinion, how should educators and policymakers assess the risk associated with generative AI?
Okay. Okay. Another good question. So I think there's going to be a lot of overlap between our AI, say, risk assessment and our generative AI risk assessment. We have, broadly speaking, several different categories of risk or impact assessments. So one that really comes from risk management approach, risk identification, measurement management. You see this in the US NIST AI risk management framework. This is a comfortable framework for a lot of companies because they often use risk management. We have well-being and human rights impact assessment, tend to be more qualitative, but can be mixed, more socio-technical, broader. We have sort of algorithmic or model impact assessments that often are very narrow, focused on sort of technical performance thresholds, benchmarks, fairness scores. And then we have sort of a safety paradigm, so safety testing or TEVV, testing, evaluation, validation, verification approaches. So all of these things are floated around in AI. My general principles here would be, I prefer socio-technical evaluations. I don't think we can just give a score and say, this is, a model that is unbiased enough. Bias is a more complicated concept. So is transparency and privacy and autonomy and all the things we care about. So socio-technical involves some qualitative as well as quantitative. So I prefer, broader or more comprehensive evaluations. I worry about some of the approaches that have very narrow, limited set of benchmarks. We might care about things like environmental impacts, for example. Let's see. I think it's really important that the evaluations cover the AI lifecycle. Many evaluations only cover the early stages, so the design stage. So you would essentially they'd be closer to something like mere risk identification. I'd say, well, I think, here's my bias, transparency, privacy. Here's a list of the 7 things I'm worried about. And, well, I'm not going to share X, Y data. So now I've managed the risks. You've only sort of started to identify risks. It's still hypothetical. You've done some stuff. You haven't even seen what happens in the real world. So I prefer a broader identification process, engaging with stakeholders to think about this very robustly. And then you design, you develop, you verify. Then you go into the real world and you look at real world impacts. So I've been a big advocate for real world measurement. I was secretary of the IEEE 7010 standard. So this is the first AI ethics industry standard published on assessing the impact of autonomous and intelligent systems and human well-being. So I think we want to, in educational settings, we want to go into the classroom and say, how did this affect student learning? How did this affect student experience? How did this affect equity? How did this affect misconduct? How did this affect the teacher's autonomy and job satisfaction? We want to measure all of these things, talk to people, do interviews, and figure out how to design not just the tools, but the whole implementation process better. So I see this as much more robust than just kind of an early stage checklist approach or something along those lines. That would be my philosophy here.
Wow, thank you. So the last one is, any other perspectives you would like to share regarding the ethics of generative AI in education?
So yeah, maybe a couple here. So as you've picked up, I have a little bit more to say about some of the risks than the benefits. There's a reason for this that I've focused on this in my profession even. So I think there's an asymmetry between the amount of investment in innovation and the amount of investment in risk management. So we'll have something like, big US companies invest 20 billion or 100 billion in AI innovation. And then we have in the US our standards body, NIST, NIST has an AI institute, AI Safety Institute. I think it's funded to the tune of 20 million. So we're talking something like, 100 to 1 investment in innovation over safety and ethics. So I think the innovation is happening. I think it will happen. I think people make ed tech tools and they pilot them and they test them out. And we're at a bigger risk of sort of doing this sloppily and poorly than we are of sort of shortcutting innovation. I think we'll be fine on innovation. We're going to do stuff. We do want to, work with people, build their literacy, build their comfort. But when we want AI tools to be trusted, we want them to be trustworthy. We want them to merit trust. So I think it's incumbent on us to take the risks really, really seriously, to take the implementation really seriously. There's still often a logic in technical circles and ed tech circles. We've got a cool tool and we're going to give everyone in the classroom, we're going to give everybody a laptop. And that's just not how educational systems work. They're much more complicated. There are many more barriers, sort of interdependencies. So I think we want to think through all of this stuff really, really carefully, even if it feels like we're not, using all the tools as quickly as we possibly can. We're going to end up with better results if we build and test and choose our tools carefully than if we just throw everything out. That's not to say we shouldn't do a bunch of really cool, thoughtful experimentation in a bunch of settings, just sort of well designed. So that's one, just to speak to sort of the kind of the asymmetry between where we are with respect to innovation and ethics. Yeah, maybe just maybe one more general thought is this is not a binary thing. Often I've heard in this discourse, especially the year after ChatGPT's public release, is it good or is it bad? Am I going to use it? Am I not going to use it? Do students think it's helping or it's hurting? And the answer is really always sort of, both. I don't think it fully makes sense to say we just want to do it or we just want to stop it all. And that can seem, obvious, but I think it does, the binary thinking does characterize a lot, where people sort of pick sides here and then they're sort of inclined to neglect the other issues. So I don't like it. It's takes jobs. I'm going to ignore it. Well, that's not going to work out super well. That may not increase your students' equity. We don't know if AI is going to improve equity by providing more tools to lower performing students, or if it's going to increase inequity by helping more digitally literate and wealthier students to be even better and more advanced. We need to try this stuff out. We need to learn. So I think, skeptics can learn, pro-innovation advocates can, find ways to be more cautious and understand that benefit, responsible innovation is better innovation. So it's a generally encouraging kind of nuance in our treatment of this, in the whole discourse surrounding AI ed.
So, thank you, Dr. Schiff. So just one last question. Do you approve make this audio interview available for everyone on YouTube?
Sure. Yeah, you have.
And of course, it will be linked to the research itself. Yeah, sorry?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you have my consent. Sure.
Thank you very much.